I'm 26 years old, and I used to have a hobby that I'm not sure many other people share: taking solo road trips across different states. I loved the feeling of being alone behind the wheel, driving hundreds of miles down long stretches of road and watching the scenery change from one place to the next. But after something that happened a few years ago, I gave up that hobby completely because that trip nearly cost me my life. That night, I was driving home to Florida after a long trip. By the time I reached a fairly deserted stretch of highway in Georgia, it was around 10 p.m. According to my GPS, I still had more than 4 hours of driving ahead of me, but since I wasn't feeling too tired, I decided to keep going through the night. If everything went smoothly, I'd make it home before sunrise and could sleep for most of the next day. The highway was surrounded by almost nothing but dark stretches of forest on both sides. Traffic became increasingly sparse, and sometimes several minutes would pass without me seeing another car. The only light came from my headlights and the occasional old roadside sign that appeared out of the darkness before quickly disappearing behind me. Everything was normal until I felt the car begin to vibrate slightly. At first, I thought it was just the road surface, but a short while later, I heard an unusual sound coming from one of the tires. I slowed down and pulled onto the shoulder to check it. What made the situation even more frustrating was that I didn't have a spare tire anymore. I'd already used it to replace a flat on the way out at the beginning of my trip and hadn't gotten around to buying another one. I stood beside the car for a moment, frustrated and blaming myself for being so careless. But when I looked around, I realized I still had a little luck on my side. Not far from where my car had stopped was a roadside motel with an old, illuminated sign. I decided to leave the car where it was, take my important belongings with me, and walk over to the motel. I figured I could stay there for one night, call someone to fix my car in the morning, and then continue my drive home. The reception area was smaller than I expected. The lighting inside was dim, the furniture looked old, and the place smelled like a mixture of cigarette smoke and beer. When I walked in, I saw two men sitting there drinking together. One was behind the front desk, while the other was sitting on the other side of the counter. I greeted them and asked if the motel owner was around. Neither of them answered right away. Instead, they just looked me up and down in a way that made me uncomfortable. After a few seconds, the man behind the desk suddenly pointed toward my pants and told me I'd forgotten to zip something up. Startled, I looked down to check my zipper, but there was nothing wrong with it. The two men immediately burst out laughing. I realized they were just messing with me. They both seemed to have had quite a bit to drink, so I didn't want to argue with them. I simply asked again about the motel owner. This time, the man behind the desk stood up and introduced himself as Roger. He said he was managing the place while the owners, an elderly couple, were away on vacation. He also introduced the other man drinking with him as Otis. I told Roger that I was having car trouble and wanted to rent a room for the night. I took out some cash and placed it on the counter to pay, but after taking the money, Roger didn't give me a key. Instead, he poured me a glass of beer, pushed it toward me, and said I still had a long drive ahead of me, so I should relax and have a drink. I didn't want the beer, but at that point I just wanted to get my room as quickly as possible, so I didn't feel like refusing. I picked up the glass, finished it, and put it back on the counter. The two men looked at each other and started laughing again, as if I had just done something hilarious. I was beginning to feel uncomfortable, so I asked Roger for the room key and told him I was tired. But he casually replied that I needed to pay for the room first. I thought I had misheard him, so I reminded him that I had put the money on the counter only a few minutes earlier. Roger immediately acted surprised and denied ever receiving any money. Then he turned to Otis and asked if he had seen me give him anything. Otis shook his head. At that point, I was genuinely angry and demanded that they check the motel's security cameras. The two of them looked at each other for a few seconds before bursting into laughter again. Roger finally placed a key marked 202 on the counter and said they had only been messing with me. I didn't find any of it funny, but I didn't want to cause any more trouble, so I took the key and left the reception area. On the way to my room, I finally had a chance to take a closer look at the motel. It was much older and dirtier than it had appeared from outside. The hallway was long, with faded carpeting and a few ceiling lights casting a weak yellow glow. Dust had collected along the edges of the walls, as though no one had cleaned those areas in a long time. I figured it probably wasn't that unusual for a small roadside motel that didn't get many guests. Room 202 wasn't much better. There was a bed, a small cabinet, and a few pieces of old furniture, but I didn't have many other options at that point. I put my suitcase on the bed, grabbed some clean clothes, and went to take a shower. Another inconvenience was that the rooms in this part of the motel shared a bathroom at the end of the hallway. I took my clothes with me, locked the bathroom door, and turned on the shower. While I was showering, I suddenly heard a noise outside. I immediately turned off the water and called out, asking if someone was there. Roger's voice came from the other side. He told me the bathroom door was old and sometimes got stuck, so if I couldn't open it later, I should just give it a hard push. I thought it was strange that Roger had suddenly appeared outside the bathroom while I was showering, but I assumed he had simply been passing by and didn't say anything else. I finished my shower as quickly as possible and got dressed. When I tried to open the door, it was stuck, just as Roger had said. I turned the handle several times, but the door wouldn't move. Eventually, I stepped back and shoved it as hard as I could. The door suddenly flew open far more easily than I expected, causing me to lose my balance and fall into the hallway. Almost immediately, I heard Roger laughing loudly in front of me. The look on his face made it obvious that the door hadn't actually been stuck at all. It was just another one of his stupid pranks. This time I couldn't hold back anymore. I got to my feet and told him directly that his jokes weren't funny. What surprised me was how quickly the smile disappeared from his face. He stared at me with an irritated expression and asked if I was really that angry and whether I planned to go online after I left and give the motel a 1-star review. I didn't want to keep arguing with him, so I went back to my room and locked the door. I browsed the internet for a while to relax, and by the time I checked the clock, it was almost 1 a.m. After such a long day of driving, I was exhausted, so I put my computer away, turned off the lights, and went to sleep. I woke up fairly early the next morning, and the first thing I did was call roadside assistance. After everything that had happened the night before, I didn't want to spend a single unnecessary minute at that motel. They told me they would send someone out, so I quickly packed my things and got ready to leave. When I was almost finished, I remembered that I had left the clothes I'd changed out of the night before in the shared bathroom. I locked my room and walked down the hallway to get them, but I was still half asleep and couldn't remember exactly where the bathroom was, so I accidentally turned into a different hallway. At first, I didn't realize I had gone the wrong way. This part of the motel was noticeably quieter than the rest. Every door was closed, and several of the ceiling lights were out, leaving the far end of the hallway almost completely dark. I kept walking until I began to notice a horrible smell. I couldn't tell exactly where it was coming from. It reminded me of food that had been left out to rot for a long time. I was about to turn around when the door to one of the nearby rooms suddenly moved. The dry hinges let out a long, piercing creak as the door slowly swung open. Instinctively, I looked inside. My entire body froze. Inside the room were the bodies of 2 elderly people. I stood there completely still for several seconds, my throat tightening so badly that I couldn't scream or make a sound. At that point, the clothes I had left in the bathroom didn't matter anymore. All I knew was that I needed to get out of that place as quickly as possible. I turned around to run toward the stairs when Roger suddenly appeared in the hallway, blocking my path. I had no idea how long he had been standing there, but his expression was completely calm. Roger looked at me and asked why I was planning to leave without saying goodbye. My mind was in complete chaos. I knew the man standing in front of me was very likely connected to what I had just seen, but my brain could barely process anything else. Roger stared at me for another moment before suddenly saying that he really liked my blue underwear. I didn't know what Roger had done or how he knew that, but I didn't want to find out. While he was still smiling at my confused expression, I suddenly rushed past him and ran as fast as I could toward the exit. I sprinted straight to my car on the side of the road, climbed inside, and immediately locked all the doors. My hands were shaking violently as I reached for my phone to call the police, but after several seconds of searching my pockets and checking the seats, I realized it wasn't there. When I looked up, Roger was standing outside my car. He was holding my phone. Roger raised it so I could see it and grinned, then repeatedly told me to unlock the door and get out of the car. All I could do was sit there with the doors locked, desperately trying to figure out what I could do. In that moment, all I could do was pray that someone would show up before Roger found a way into the car. Fortunately, it wasn't long before a service vehicle pulled off the highway and into the parking lot. It was the roadside assistance crew I had called earlier that morning. The moment Roger saw them, his entire demeanor changed. He turned around and immediately ran away from the motel. I still didn't dare get out of the car until the workers came over to me. Once I was sure Roger was gone, I finally unlocked the door and asked one of them to call the police. Roger had fled, but by the end of that day, the police informed me that they had arrested him. I had to stay behind to give a statement and wasn't allowed to leave until the police had finished everything they needed from me. By the time my car was repaired and I was finally able to continue my drive home to Florida, the excitement I had always felt during long road trips was completely gone. And ever since that trip, I haven't taken another interstate road trip alone.